right, guys, welcome to the Conversation Shop with Sedrick Page. Today, I'm here with my very special guest again, Mr. Curt Singleton, entrepreneur, businessman. Today, Curt and I will be discussing, does racism exist, specifically as it relates to the monopoly analogy. Curt, we're going to dive right in. I want to jump right into the conversation with you. I want to welcome you again back to the Conversation Shop. Again, I always like to start the show with you telling my audience a little bit about you and what made you want to be a part of this specific conversation.
Well, I had such a great time last time, so I have to appreciate you, Sedrick, for having me back on. We touched on, some subjects. Again, I'm Curt Singleton. I invest, certified crane operator. I also do some management on some actual things that I do have investments in. And this is who I am. And these are the things that have grown me as an entrepreneur, as a businessman, through all of the, challenges through life, but we make it through with growth. So, I just thank you for having me here, Sedrick. I'm just excited, man. I'm really, really appreciated. And man, I am honored to be again in your presence. So, thank you.
I'm honored to have you. My cousin, respectfully, like I said, I tell you all the time, you're wise beyond your years. So we're gonna dive right into this conversation. So the audience, we're gonna discuss, does racism exist, specifically as it relates to the monopoly analogy? And the reason why I decided to have this conversation, again, I have friends who are a lot younger than me. My son, they always discuss with me, Sedrick, or Dad, you look at things from the lens of color, of the lens from race. And I explained to them very directly, no, I don't. I look at things from a place of experience and from historic things. So when you have experiences and you understand your history, then you're able to identify and you're able to see certain systemic things that are in place. Now, specifically, does racism exist? And do I believe that racism, quote unquote, exists? Let me start by explaining the monopoly analogy. The monopoly analogy is this. When you start playing Monopoly, everyone starts off the same. Everybody has the same amount of money.
Correct.
Everybody has an opportunity to buy property, which is zero when you start. So everyone is on the same playing field. The rules of Monopoly, the laws that govern Monopoly are all the same for everyone that plays this game. Okay? So let's say, Curt, you and I start playing Monopoly. We've played Monopoly. We've gone around the board 5 or 6 times, 10 times. During that time, we're buying up property. At the same time we're buying up property, we're putting houses on these properties. We're putting hotels on these properties. We're setting rent on these properties up and down. So again, what we're doing is we're speaking to access, right? So let's say after you and I have only been playing this game and we've acquired all of this wealth, right? Let's say a fourth player comes along. When that fourth player comes along to play the game, he starts out again, quote unquote, the same way we did, with the same amount of money we started with, but he started with zero property. Now, is the playing field, again, level? Yeah, the rules are the same. The playing field is, quote unquote, level, but he's dealing with the equity and the systems that you and I have put in place that he has to contend with. He doesn't have any property. He doesn't own any homes. He doesn't have any hotels. And quite frankly, because we have all the wealth, we set all of the rules. We set the rules, right? So is there real equity? That's the question. Because what we've done is we've set historic precedents through our runs around the monopoly board. We decide what the rules actually are because we are the property owners. And as long as we function within those rules, we can let in who we want to let in, We can exclude who we don't want to let in. We can sell to who we want to sell to. So again, today we're going to discuss, does racism exist through the lens of the monopoly analogy? Do you have any comments so far in my explanation of what the monopoly analogy is, or would you like me to explain or go into it a little more in depth?
Well, basically, I understand clearly where you're coming from. And the first thing that jumps out to me, Sedrick, is we started the game first.
Right.
So now, okay, if we can hold the third and fourth player back for maybe a few years where we can implement all of these extra little rules, when you land on my property, you got to pay me. So now we have cornered things in our advantage where there are only small little spots that you could hit that you're able to get you a house or get you something. But if you're going around here and you're landing on our property, we're going to take the little money that you already don't have, because now there are those, I go back to what we spoke about last time, those landmines. And our houses, hotels, and all of those are landmines because we've started the race late. So there go the landmines, okay? So now I go back to the strategy part of it, okay? For one, you have to be very, very, very smart with the little money that you start out with, which is planning, okay? Those landmines are out there. So with me, if I'm gonna start out on this board, I'm gonna say, okay, I got these guys on up this block. Now I got to make this first turn. Sedrick got 2 spots on this side and Curt got 3. So for one, I'm gonna pray and say, God, I hope that I can hit that property between them two or between the two that him and Sedrick has, and I can get past this first path. However, if you do not plan for that, you will be in much worse shape in trying to grow in progress in life if you're not planning ahead. Because the one thing that you know when you get on that board is you see that we got properties there. And you know when you land on those properties, you have to pay.
And our goal is to break you. I want all your money.
Okay, because we want to corner the market.
Right. Now, let me ask you another quick question.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Let me ask you another quick question. So as you discuss planning, right, and your understanding of how to play the game, right, that's only less than 1% of people who actually look like us, who have the mindset and the thoughts to understand how to play the game, right? So what are the other limitations to the fourth player that comes on that board to play, right? The analogy, we're equating this to real life. So you have to know and have the education of the experience, right? You have to know and understand how to play the game, right? So what if you come to the table with some disadvantages, right? Like a lot of people do, not just people who look like us, but a lot of people come to the table or come to the game with less skills than we have, right? Or less skills than the people who've been playing this game for a long time. So we're talking about access to knowledge, right? Knowledge is key. The people who have knowledge, the people who have all the information, have all the power. So we can equate that to education. We can equate that to skills. Do you have the skills to know when to buy homes, when not to buy homes, when to sell for the hotel on this monopoly property, right? And here's the other caveat that we have to think about is, what if we own the majority of the property that's there? What if there's not a lot left to play with, right? So then I have to, or the fourth person that's playing the game has to hopefully entice one of us to sell a property to them so they can get in the game and start actively being an active participant the way that we have. Now, in this first segment, we have about 2 more minutes of left on this segment. So I want to give you the floor to comment on that last analogy that I just talked about.
Okay, what I'm gonna do with this, Cedric, I'm gonna add a little more to the Monopoly board, okay? And I'm gonna put a little more to life. Now, as a smart person, I know that you and I are so-called bigwigs.
Mm-hmm.
Have to come up with a service for y'all. Can I landscape one of your yards? Can I do some plumbing in one of your houses?
Mm-hmm.
Can I do something where I can get in with a skill to where I can put a plan together because it's already cornered off now. Now I'm in hopes of hitting this land, but if my A plan is only to try to catch those open lands, I may never be able to catch that. So I have to have a plan B, C, D, E, and F. Okay, if I can offer a service, get in somehow that way, I'm able to now generate some business where I'm still able to grow in a different little field, but I'm offering a service to you and I to where I can most definitely grow and maybe be able to get you to sell me one of these properties that I have offered service to, where you may be looking at, okay, he took very good care of this. He did this. He even did a couple extra things that I didn't even ask him to do. So now you're playing the game of getting in, as a friendship, as courteousness, and we're looking at this. And those are the other plans that you have to come up with. Don't necessarily have to be that in specific, but I want you to put the thought process of how you can come into things, even in a disadvantage, with giving yourself an opportunity to grow.
I agree totally with that analogy of giving yourself an opportunity to grow. But, as we in the first segment and we're going into the next part of the show, I want to point out to you that what if, because we're talking about being an employee, right? What if you and I, who started the game, invested in you being an employee for us? So we never want to give you access to the game. So again, and maybe the reason I don't want to give you access to the game is because you're orange. Because you're Oopa Loopa. You know what I'm saying? I don't mess with any Oopa Loopas, right?
Gotcha.
So again, I wanted to take this first segment to talk about the Monopoly analogy. So on the next segment, we're going to equate the Monopoly analogy to real life, talking about real life situations to kind of give our audience some meat and potatoes to hold on to. Okay? We'll be right back on the Conversation Shop. Hi, welcome back to the Conversation Shop with Sedrick Page. Again, I'm here with my very special guest, Mr. Curt Singleton, businessman, entrepreneur. Curt, on the first segment, we were discussing, does racism exist, and equating it to the Monopoly analogy. Now, as we were talking about the Monopoly analogy, real quickly, everybody starts the game the same. Everybody has the same rules. Everybody has the same money. And it's about acquiring property and equity. So again, you and I had been playing the game, for a while. So we bought up most of the property. We own most of the homes. We own most of the hotels. Then we have a fourth person or a third person that comes into play, who again starts with the same amount of money we started with, has the same quote unquote, or does he have the same opportunity to buy property that we had? And how does that relate to you and I owning the majority of the property? So does he really have equity? Does he really have access? So you used an example of saying that, in order to, when you start the game or equating it to real life, maybe you should work for that place. Maybe you should start a lawn care business, taking care of the property and using that relationship that you're building and the having the owner equate your care of that property with excellence is what you're talking about, to open the door where he may want to sell you a property or sell you a piece of something to give you ownership or equity so you can begin to really play the Monopoly game in real life. And one of the things I wanted to point out to you before we dive into really talking about real life monopoly and how this equates to that is based upon your analogy and your example. Again, it suggests that racism doesn't exist. As I said, what if you're orange Oompa Loompa and I'm over here and I don't want to sell the orange Oompa Loompas? You know what I'm saying? So there's nothing you could ever do to make me sell one of my properties. And let's say I tell you my properties are for my children and my children's children. So I want to keep this equity and this wealth, this generational wealth with me. So I'm never really going to give you access. I'd rather keep you as a worker and make money off of you. And many years as you work for me, the more money I earn from you. So again, are you saying to the audience that based upon your example, does racism exist?
And to be honest with you, when you look at it in those terms, the first thing that jumps out to me, Sedrick, okay, selfishness and security of self and family. And when I look at that and I say to myself, okay, just because this person is orange Oompa Loompa, they have the power to be racial about it. You could be a perfect candidate. You can be, the perfect person that they could sell to. But again, because of powers to be, I choose not to allow you to grow in your life. And when you look at situations like that, it comes to individuals because said we have good and bad people in every race. And the only thing that I can revert to is saying that, hey, pray and hope God that gives you that opportunity to allow someone to have something good in their heart. And when you speak on, I want to give it to my kids and I have to go to the example of when I visited Green Bay.
Okay.
The reason those tickets are always sold out because they can pass them down to their children, to their grandchildren, and they even have the access of giving season passes to a first cousin. Mm-hmm. So you may never get in. You get me? You may have to always pay that extra money to get a ticket because you're an outsider. So again, that goes based off of exactly what you just told me. You would actually have to basically get an opportunity from someone who's just maybe want to do some kind will. But if they're looking at you as orange Oompa Loompa, you probably never will get in. You just got to hope to land on some property that isn't owned by me or you, Sedrick.
Right.
That's the only way.
Now, I'm glad we're diving into this. So again, let's jump out of the monopoly board and let's talk about real life. So again, what I'm going to say to you is in 2021, right? Systemic racism. There's no laws in the country now that says you can discriminate based on race at all. Okay. So there's laws in place to eliminate racism in the workplace, going to eat based in our everyday life. There are things in place to protect us and say that racism doesn't exist. So a lot of times I think people that look like you and I and others that don't, mistake racism, they mistake discrimination for racism. Okay. So again, mistake discrimination, which is personal between you and I, with systemic racism that deals with systems being in place. So when you have a lot of conservatives out here who say racism doesn't exist and Black people need to pick themselves up by the bootstraps and do it themselves, right? From a visual standpoint and immediate standpoint, I have to concede that if I look at it from that standpoint, racism doesn't exist because the laws tells us that there is no discrimination. The laws protect everybody. They protect people that look like you and I, Latino Americans, Mexican Americans, whomever. They protect all of us. And they're supposed to provide all of us with equal protection under the law, right? Supposed to. So let's talk about some of the discriminatory things or possibly discriminatory things or contradictions that tell people that look like you and I that there is no equity. And it forces us to look at the world and say, well, maybe maybe racism still does exist. For instance, Colin Kaepernick kneeling. Colin Kaepernick in the past kneeled football games. The president, he's unpatriotic. These people that support him and these people that look like you and I, they're just unpatriotic. They're just foul people. They're foul people. Beat them. Get them out of here. Why are you paying them millions of dollars, right? Why are you doing this? Get them out of here. They don't respect the country. They don't respect the freedoms, quote unquote, the freedoms that this country provides. They're unpatriotic, right? They use that. But here we are again, just last Wednesday on January 6th, we see, quote unquote, patriots running into the Capitol, tearing down buildings, putting up scaffolding to hang people, talking about, kill Pence, all these different things, right? So we see that. And when we look out and see who's being represented, there aren't people that look like you and I. And for me, one of the major contradictions I had was I immediately went, wow, if that was anyone that looked like us, me and you, running to attack, number one, we wouldn't have made it to the steps. Number two, it would have been a massacre. We'd have been talking about all the dead people that look like you and us, and we would have been arrested immediately. They would have shut the city down. No one would have got out. So to me, that's a big contradiction. And it tells me that discrimination is real. And from a larger standpoint, because of access and their ability to do what they did, it tells me that systemic racism still exists. Do you have any comments on that?
Well, this is the thing, Sedrick. And when I look at what happened on the 6th, it takes me back when they actually went for peaceful protest to D.C. Remember how they had it armed for that. It was armed. They're armed. I'm talking about the D.C. When they went up there just to, for peaceful protests up there, it was a totally different atmosphere. We're talking about the Capitol. These people went in here talking about they was ready to hang people. And if people aren't able to look at this, because I go back to what we talked about on our first episode. A lot of those players did not support Colin Kaepernick out the gate. But what he was doing, he went out on the limb. And what he was doing was trying to prevent what we're going through today. Right. So now, a lot of them was thinking about their pockets, okay? So now, oh man, I don't want to have nothing to do with that. I make millions of dollars. But it takes a real person like Colin Kaepernick to put beside what most of the athletes, most of these major universities, right? Okay, because remember now, Walter Payton, Jerry Rice, and them, they had to go to a HBCU. They couldn't go to, Michigan, Ohio State, LSU's, Ole Miss, So these are the things that people cannot forget about history. Because what Colin Kaepernick, he went out, he did not get with a group of people and say, come on, I want y'all to kneel with me. He did it by himself. That's what makes me respect him so much.
Let me ask you a quick question. Talk to me about, did you see any contradictions to that? Or did you see anything that validated for you that maybe discrimination and racism actually does exist versus the analogy that it doesn't in those examples that I gave?
Without a doubt, Sedrick. Look at it. If that was us storming them, you would have had a massacre. You would have had every armed, military force coming up there, and it would be shoot on sight. It wouldn't have been like what we saw, man. It wouldn't have been nobody running. It would have been, they crazy, they evil. And it goes back to, Sedrick, our first episode together was, it don't matter because you have education. It show you that people can't think. They're followers. So at the end of the day, yes, they knew that they had the capabilities of doing it and basically, not getting killed. I mean, it was some people that few, but we're talking about a small number compared to if that was that many of us or that many of Hispanics, oh, it would have been a massacre, man. So most definitely that is something, if people didn't wake up to that, Sedrick, come on, man. Like, y'all don't want to see. You just don't.
And my question is, and I'll end this segment with this, when it came to patriotism, kneeling because to protest people that look like you and I getting killed, being called unpatriotic, and people who are violating the Constitution, trying to hurt people, kill people, running into the state building is patriotic. I think there's a major contradiction in the world today if people still consider that patriotic and can't at least concede the things that Colin Kaepernick was trying to do. That contradiction. Guys, we're going to move right back into, on the next segment, we're going to still start equating this monopoly analogy to real life, just to give you some context as we decide or discuss whether racism still exists. We'll be right back on The Conversation Shop. Hi, guys. Welcome back to The Conversation Shop. My guest, Curt Singleton, businessman, entrepreneur, are having a really in-depth conversation about does racism exist and equating it to the monopoly analogy. And we're going to dive right in on this and equate the monopoly analogy to real life. So again, Curt, we're playing Monopoly, right? We started this game. You and I started the game knowing the rules are the fair, the same amount of money, the same access. But it was just you and I playing this game first. You and I only had the access to the game. So we bought up most of the properties on here, on the board. So we put houses, hotels, as I said before. Now there's a third person or fourth person that wants to play this game. Now we say it's fair because you start the game with the same amount of money we did. You have access to buying property just like we did, but you and I own most of the property. We have history here. We have generational wealth here. Okay. So we create what's underneath is that we're creating the rules of access to this monopoly game. So as we equate this monopoly analogy to real life, let's say we have that third and fourth players are the Oompa Loompas, the orange Oompa Loompas, right? So we say, I don't want the orange Oompa Loompas on Broadway. The only property I'll ever sell to an orange Oompa Loompa is on Baltic Avenue, the poorest section, on the board that gives you the least amount of money. So I'm going to force all the Oompa Loompas over here, okay? And as we know by Baltic Avenue, there's the jailhouse that's right next to Baltic Avenue if you miss it. So there's jails for you to police you to make sure you don't get past Baltic Avenue, okay? So we're going to do everything we can to not give you access to, number one, again, let me equate Baltic Avenue and pushing people over here is redlining. I'm equating that to redlining. So now we've started redlining, okay? Now we put Jim Crow laws in place to keep you over there. So now we have a police force in place to keep you in the bad area. So do you actually have access? We talk about jobs. Now you and we keep all the jobs over by Broadway, Pacific Avenue. I play Monopoly well. So we keep all the jobs over on our side. And you and I decide, well, you know what? We're building all these highways, but we're not vested in building access to Baltic Avenue so they can just scoot over here real quickly. Make it easy for them to get over here and get jobs, get to our kids, get to our ladies, to do all these things. We want to keep these quote unquote Oompa Loopers over here. So what we're doing is we're eliminating access to these good jobs and quite frankly, their ability to take care of their families. Now we decided we're going to keep all the good schools and the good universities over here. So we're going to put the best books into these schools. We're going to give the athletes the best equipment, the best coaches, which equates to giving them access to the best colleges, in high school. We're going to make sure that They have the best of everything. The Orange Oompa Loompas over here, we're going to say, you know what? They have enough. They have good schools. They don't have schools like us, but they don't deserve schools like us. We played longer than them. They have to earn the right to get over here. And maybe I don't want to give them that, right? Now we're talking about, let's say, farming, right? We got to feed them, right? But, you know, when we give land grants, I'm going to give all the land grants to people that look like us, our kids, our friends. I'm not going to give land grants to the Oompa Loompas. I'm not going to give the Oompa Loompas the opportunity to own houses, because I'm going to tell you, if you sell them a house, I'm going to boot you out the team, right? I'm going to put you out of the club. Okay, so now we're talking about access to wealth. So again, as we're talking about monopoly, the monopoly analogy, you know, and we look at to say that racism doesn't exist. Well, quite frankly, there's systemic things that we can put in place as we play the game that may be very clearly based on the race or the color of the Oompa Loompas, because we don't want them here. But again, what we're doing is systemically putting things in place. But when it comes to the daily interaction, you know, we're discriminating against them because we may not like them because they wear blue shirts and black shoes. So I don't want to give anybody with blue shirts and black shoes jobs or anything. So again, I'm creating this space so you can see how it relates to society. So I'm going to give you 2-3 minutes to comment on that analogy and really equate it to real life in your experiences. For example, we talked about Jackson State. Deion Sanders came out and said Jackson State facilities were bad compared to Florida State and the other larger institutions. And he said, this is the reason these kids didn't get an opportunity to get to the pros. So I had to get them new helmets, new access, new training tables, those kinds of things. We look at Grambling State University, who, as you discussed with me, put the majority of African-American or brown athletes into the NFL. But when you go back to the school, it still doesn't compare to an LSU. It still doesn't compare to a Florida State. So we have to ask ourselves, you know, as we related to this monopoly game and access to wealth, what's the reasons behind that? And those are the contradictions that make some people think that racism or systemic racism is real. And it's a contradiction to the stance that racism doesn't exist anymore. Comment.
Okay. I'm going to say this, Sedrick, and I hope that they really hear me on this. I want people to understand one thing. Sports bring in more revenue in universities than anything else.
And football specifically.
Exactly. And when you look at this, you have certain coaches, your Nick Sabans, you know, your big names that's making $10 million. But they're making it off of most of these athletes that are superb, black. Okay. Mm-hmm. And it became a big issue when they went to talking about paying these guys, because again, they have pushed the on Oompa Loompas. Remember high school, okay? Your high school not as good as mine. You know, you're over here where it's low income. Mm-hmm. So now they begin to corner the market to say, okay, now we need 2 or 3 of those Oompa Loompas over here to keep our program at the top. Okay,
but so those are the exceptions.
That you're the exception, but don't think that it's an exception, because it is an advantage. They need this, because if you keep the orange Oompa Loompas over there and they get together and they really come together and unify, like I spoke on in our first segment, and if they really got smart and not get mirrored by the blinding of the money or the things that they throw out at these kids to get them to come, they will understand how dominant there will not be a LSU or Ohio State or Michigan that could beat them, because we got all of the top 5-star athletes over here. Mm-hmm. So, you know, this is where it comes down, because, you know, man, I respect Deion so much to go to Jackson State, man. He didn't have to do that. But he is one of the ones, like a Colin Kaepernick, that said, hey, I'm going over here and I'm going to take this job. Because his influence alone, Sedrick, will bring people there because of who he is, and he can make a difference. And that's the thing about it is when you look at these small schools and why they're at such a disadvantage, if I got a school over here can flounder me 100,000 and this school can't really give me nothing, and I come from the Oopa Loopa neighborhood where I never had nothing. I came from a high school that, we barely made it all of, they're going to run for that because they feel that's a safety net. They feel that they can get away, they can live good for once in their life, but they're jumping so soon because they're young. It's you got a lot of life ahead of you from high school, even though life is short. You do have a lot, but they jump to that. And that's why those schools are put at a disadvantage because, they're the ones, again, where we're at. Again, me and you, we didn't monopolize this. We want to make Ole Miss and Mississippi State way better than Alcorn and Jackson State.
Well, for the last couple of minutes, I really want to draw your attention to, you brought up these Oopa Loopa, the bad Oopa Loopa neighborhoods, right? So let's say we got the crime on the last show, we talked about black on black or brown on brown crime, where we're killing each other, right? Now, the society says you guys should pick yourselves up by the bootstraps. And if people that look like you and I want to do better, want better for themselves, or want access to wealth, you have to create spaces to obtain that, right? You have to do it yourself. But again, as you talked about, you have the athlete, and let's talk about that. Leaves, gets $1 million, but does he go back to the Oompa Loompa land and rebuild it, invest in that community, invest in better schools? Do they do that? No, they don't. We're not seeing any of that. Now, when we talk about bettering your community, if all you see is death, killing, uneducated, drug selling, when you look at your father and your grandfather, they were doing the same things you're doing. So do you have hope? How do you tell someone in that environment to pick themselves up by the bootstraps and do something better when you and I know, sitting over here on Broadway, we've created this system, this systemic space to keep them where they are. But we tell you the playing field is level. The rules are the same. We've created a space where you can't discriminate. That's not happening. So stop making excuses about not doing better for you. Take the last minute on this segment to really talk about that a little bit. Give me about less than a minute if you can.
Well, basically, Sedrick, it's not an even playing field. I mean, you've put people in these situations who want to run from that. They want to get away from that. And, the thing is that, again, it goes back to our other segment of saying we have to take accountability. Okay, you've made it, but don't leave them behind, because you may have got the lucky break, but it's probably about 15, 20 more of them that's probably a better athlete than you. You just got a break. Mm-hmm. So let's not forget about the unification part that I talk about. Mm-hmm. Let's not talk about understanding that we have to come to that point to get the understanding of saying, don't leave behind, reach back and try to help. And that's where, I think that, we would have to go with that. But that would be the only way, because you basically don't have an opportunity because we've got it cornered and we've got it set up how we want it set.
So based upon the monopoly analogy, again, and equating that to what we are talking about, I ask you, does racism exist?
Yes, it does.
We'll be right back on The Conversation Shop. Hi, guys. Welcome back to The Conversation Shop. Man, we're having a great conversation about, does racism exist? And the last question I asked my very special guest, Curt Singleton, as it relates to the monopoly analogy, does it exist? His answer was yes. And again, the monopoly analogy, just to catch everybody up with the conversation, is everybody starts with the same amount of money, the same rules apply to everybody. But Mr. Singleton and I started the game first. We had access to the board first. So we bought up most of the properties. We built homes. We built hotels. So we have all the equity. Now we're vested in generational wealth. So we want to keep these properties with people that look like us, our children, our families. We want to keep that, right? Then we talked about the orange Oompa Loompas. So you can equate the Oompa Loompas to whoever you want to. But we're going to push over here. We're going to give them limited access because we're making these decisions to keep wealth, right? Because if you talk about equity, then you want to let people in, right? Real equity is letting people in. So what are the reasons why these things are happening, right? Is it systemic racism or is it discrimination, which is one-on-one and personal? So we have to define and really understand what these things mean. So again, if you ask me, does racism exist? Let me put it bluntly. As it relates to the laws and rules of the land, access to education, getting jobs, laws being in place to say you can't discriminate by race, by sex, by any of these things, racism doesn't exist. So I have a son that says to me it doesn't. So when I look at it from that space, I can tell you, no, it doesn't. From a legal standpoint and a rule standpoint, it absolutely, being blunt, you have to say it doesn't exist. But I'm older and smarter, and I have wisdom to where I can see behind the veil, right? So equating it back to the Monopoly analogy, Mr. Singleton and I have been playing these games. So now we're the puppet masters. So we can decide what the rules are. We can decide who we want to give access to and who we don't want to give access to. So as we equate this to the world, there's only so much property you can own. There's only so many things that you can have access to, but wealth and education and knowledge gives you that access, right? So if I don't educate you properly, if I don't give you the tools to know the things that I know and to do the things that I do, you're always going to be at a disadvantage to me. You're always going to be a worker to me. So again, as I look out into the world and I see the puppet masters of the plays, and I believe in opening up my third eye. I see these games that are played. I take responsibility for myself. Now, do I believe we should, as a community, take responsibility for ourselves? Of course. I'm a man. I'm a hunter. You throw me in the jungle, I'm going to come out fat, eating elephants, lions, and bears. That's how I feel. When I think of the stimulus check, I think it's great. People need it. But quite frankly, as far as I'm concerned, F the stimulus check, because it's creating an ideology. It's creating children that look to the government to give them things. I'm a man. I make my own way. God has given me a mind, a body, a soul to do my own thing, create my own spaces, go hunt, kill, stalk, and cook my own food. Now, does that mean access? Yes, it means access, but its access is all about what you view and see as access, what you see as an opportunity. So again, I want to be clear. Overall, definitely, I feel racism exists, but it's very subtle. And racism, we're towing the line between discrimination and systemic racism, because systemic racism is definitely being weeded out on many, many levels. But the problem we have is the puppet masters that sit in the seats that only want to surround themselves with people that look like them and only want to give access to other people that look like them. So I challenge my audience to really understand what Monopoly actually is and to really pay attention to the game, because it's about equity and access. Curt, again, I'm going to ask you, based upon the Monopoly analogy, does racism exist in your mind? And if it does,
Sedrick. It's like you say, what it is now, because the systematic part of it makes it seem, and it does says that it's not supposed to be, but that's where the discrimination part comes in. And when I speak on that, and I have to say this, I think back when the LA riots went down. Okay. Mm-hmm. The Vietnamese lady shot the 16-year-old, 15-year-old girl in the back of the head, saying that she was trying to steal orange juice. Okay. However, when she went into the courtroom, she was sentenced to 16 years. But what the judge did was put her on probation. and community service. Mm-hmm. So this is where the part comes in where we know if that was a black lady that shot a white girl or a Vietnamese girl, she would have went to prison. Okay. So I'm using this as an example to show you the discrimination part. You had the white judge up there, you had the Vietnamese lady, but you had the little black girl who was a good student. Then the part of it was when the police got there, the money for the orange juice was in her hand. So this is where, you look at these things and you have to look at the examples. Your orange Oopa Loopas, okay? Hey, the system is packed majority with blacks and Hispanics, but we're not the ones that's doing more crimes. Listen, the patriotic move on the White House showed you that we're not the ones that's just doing all the crime. Mm-hmm. However, because it was so public, Sedrick, they have to make an example on this one because it walked through the front door and it was their own people. It wasn't us. You can't just go to the news and say, oh, these guys were acting like animals and these you can't present it like that. Okay. You see, because, the words that they use, patriotic opposed to gangsters. Okay. In my eyes, they was gangsters. Okay.
And terrorists.
Terrorists, okay? That's what they labeled as the Bin Laden. That was a Bin Laden type of move. Mm-hmm. If that's what you want to say, and I'm not going to say what went on with Bin Laden, because I don't know. I don't know the full truth of what y'all did to that guy. And I really don't know if he was the one who sent those planes there. Could it have been y'all? So these are examples that I'm using to where the brainwash is did, Sedrick. Okay, we make up most of the system, but it just showed you, man, people, you got criminals out there in every race. But hey, if it's the white police that pull over the white boy, they got drugs. Hey, going on home. But if it's the black guy or the Hispanic that's pulled over with them, you going to jail. So they makes this system how they want it. The monopoly. This is what we're talking about, Sedrick. The life of cultivating things how we want, because me and you got the power. Remember, we got the power on the board, okay? And these are examples that you have to look at, and you have to use your brain. You have to think. I'm so big on thinking, Sedrick, because it's important. Because if you're easily influenced by what people tell you, you are a follower. You're not a thinker. Remember what you said, Sedrick? Mm-hmm. Hey, forget the stimulus check. You can go out here and get it because you are a man and you are a leader, Sedrick. But if people are equating things that they're following by what someone telling them, what the TV are telling them, and not using their own thought process, you're a follower. I don't care what you say because you're not using your own thought process. And that's just how I look at it, and that's what I truly believe.
Well, I thank you for that comment. Again, going back to what we saw on January 6th, what we're talking about, if we equating this back to the monopoly analogy, and we're the puppet masters that are on the board, right? So the only people that would feel comfortable coming over to Broadway and doing anything would be the people that look like us, or the people who feel entitled and feel like they have the right to do it. This is our house. This is my streets. This is what I can do and what you can't. Because again, as we equate it to when, we have our own feelings about BLM. I don't want to talk about them all the time because as far as I'm concerned, Black lives matter all the time. But again, when we equate that to the peaceful march that they had, we saw the Capitol Police out in force, beating people, knocking people over the head, all these different things. And then when we look at the other response, we don't see the same thing. So again, people did that because they knew they could do it, as you said, and they can get away with it. So as we end this segment, I want to challenge my audience to see through the veil, to see the world and see the things that people that don't look like them, or the green Oompa Loompas or the orange Oompa Loompas, see what these people are going to. Try to empathize with some of the historical and the systemic things that have been put in place to make the field unlevel, to create situations, to create spaces. Now, I'm not saying that should be a crutch or an excuse for any of us, and I challenge people that look like me to never use it as a crutch or an excuse at all, but to say that we're on the same playing field and to say the rules are all the same when you've had more access and started the game before me is really to tell lies, and really is not to be honest. So before we end real quick, Curt, I want you to take 1 minute and leave my audience with some closing words, and then I'll close this segment off.
Well, again, the one thing that I want the audience to understand, and I want them to revert back to what happened at the Capitol. The entitlement of a lady from Tennessee to state it is a revolution and that you only got maced in their face and said specifically where that shows you their entitlement to feel that they can go in our capital, defecate, urine, do all of these type of things. It's no way that any of us of any minority race could even have a thought that if we did that we would have been handled just how they was. Impossible.
And finally, do you believe that racism still exists?
Of course.
Okay. Well, my audience, I want to thank you for joining me on the Conversation Shop. I want to challenge all of you to, again, look through the veil and just look in the mirror and be honest with yourself. Again, my motto is, if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, and talks like a duck, it's a duck, it's not a chicken. And I want to challenge you all to remind you all that we're stronger together than we ever will be separated. So I send blessings and well wishes to the United States, to my audience, to people that live in this world with me. And I pray for us that we find ways to come together, to be peacefully, and remember that we're all brothers, and we're all brothers and sisters, and we're all in this together. Blessings and well wishes, and good night from the Conversation Shop.